There we go. And let's see what we got here. I have ever anyone in yet? Right. Ta-da! Hello, everybody. See what we got here. There's 12 of us, not too bad. Oh, here's a couple more stragglers. George and Zach. Jacqueline. Nice. All right. That feels like a pretty good sized group. All right. Yes, if you can, please turn on your cameras for me. You don't have to have your microphones hot, but if you can, without crashing your computer, obviously, go ahead and turn your cameras on, folks. Okie doke. All right. This is a good group. All righty. Let me, whoops, change my view here. Can't. Okay. Well, let's see. Let's do it like this then. Okay. Here we are in week, what? Say it. Week 7. And today, I want to talk to you guys about filters. So filters are fun. It doesn't take a lot of calculation or anything like that. It's not complex, but it can be very creative. And I want to talk to you about the benefits of in-camera filtration today. But before I start with that, I want to point out that you have your midterm next week. And I have a question. I want to put it to the class. You guys can have, the midterm's going to cover the first 7 sections. First section was the intro, camera department, media storage, camera types, lenses, and now filters. Okay, so I don't think it's going to be a very complex test. I call it really a super quiz more than a test because it's not really, it's not a brain drain. It should be pretty simple. You'll have 30 questions, multiple choice, and you'll have an hour to answer them all, which I think is plenty of time for this quiz. But here's what I want to know. Here's what I'd like to find out. Would you guys prefer to have a review class next week? Or do you want to just have the quiz open all week and you can take it at whatever point you want to, and you guys can take your studying into your own responsibility? What do you think? Is there a consensus here, one way or the other? Because I hadn't really planned a review class per se, but I suppose we could. I mean, there may be some folks that might benefit from it. What I can certainly do is make that optional, because what I've already done is I've set the quiz up so that it opens Monday morning, and then it will close Friday evening at 11:59 p.m., a minute before midnight. Okay. Now it's timed, so you only get an hour to do it, but you can do it at any point next week that you want to. Okay. Which I think makes it pretty easy, because then your schedule won't be a conflict. You can study as little or as much as you want. If you feel like you've already got this stuff, put away, you can take it Monday morning and have a week off, basically. or you can, study and, take your time with it all week and then, take it Thursday night or Friday afternoon and, whatever you want to do. But I'm sort of beside myself as to what to do about a review class. I guess I can have one. I have one for my writing class. It just kind of feels like, a lot of people don't show up for those things anyway. It's remedial, so I'm not covering anything new. But I'll tell you what, I'll do one. I'll do a review class, but I'll still leave the quiz open, and you can do whatever you want. So you can come to the review on Monday if you want, and then go take the quiz. What I'll have to do though is I won't be able to open the quiz until after I've given the review class, obviously. So that would mean that the quiz would open at about what 6 o'clock, 6 p.m. on Monday. So you kind of lose a day, but you know, no big deal, really. Like I said, I mean, this quiz is really easy. So if it really trips you up and you bomb this one bad, I don't know. We'll have to have a Zoom and talk about it, a private session. But okay, so that's what's up. So you've got today we're here, week 7 today. We're going to do filters, and then the midterm is next week. And I'll change the opening so that it's 6 p.m. on Monday, and then you can take it whenever you want. Okay, so back to web courses. So after that, here is the unpublished remainder of the course. Oh, it would probably help if I shared my screen, huh? So you can see what I'm talking about. Okay, so here we are. We're here next week, midterm, and then the rest of the class is going to kind of look like this. So we have rendering the image, and rendering the image is I take my concepts that I cover in Cinematography 2 in terms of shooting for the edit and coverage and shot sizes and shot design. And I sort of compress that into a conversation about composition and the basic shots, which is kind of what that storyboard PDF was about last week that I gave you so you could do your assignment. We're going to take that notion and we're going to look at it a little more closely and talk about composition and design in terms of the cinematic image. And that's a precursor to a conversation we have in Cinematography 2 about actually shooting for coverage and thinking about the edit of how something's going to go and constructing the visuals accordingly. So this will be the Cinematography 1 version of that conversation. The week after that, we're going to have lighting fundamentals, and I'll talk to you about 3-point lighting, how to construct that, and we'll talk about some of the tools, some of the lighting and things. I'll show you some interesting software that you might find fun to practice with, virtual lighting studio. I have a conversation about what makes our videos cinematic, which if we need more time on any of the remaining sections, I can sort of chair that discussion because I do want to talk to you about exposure and depth of field, and that's going to fall under section 1.9 as well, rendering the image. Okay, so we're going to have kind of a complex discussion about exposure. I think it's the first week after the midterm. Okay. And that's usually where I need to take a little extra time for folks. So if that proves to be the case, I may chair the 2.1 discussion about the cinematic aspects of the image, and we'll just cover composition and image design. And then for the last week, I want to talk to you about a few different modes of camera movement that you can utilize when you start shooting your projects for other classes and stuff. Think about more than just the handheld camera or the static tripod operative camera. And we'll talk about some gimbals and some booms and jibs and things like that that you can possibly employ, dolly moves. and that'll be the semester. So that's kind of what's up ahead. That's what's in store. But for now, I just want to cover today's conversation now about filters. So let me go to my presentation. And can everybody see my window okay here? Here's what I'll do. I'll shrink that and I'll move this over. There we go. Okay. So week 7, filters. Okay. So I'm going to talk to you about a few different varieties of filters. And the outline is different types of filters, their function and their relationship to the camera. In other words, how do we attach them? I'll talk to you about some specific filters, 5 specific filters. And then I'll talk to you about the matte box system that holds those filters if you go with the cut glass filter variety. Okay. So this should be hopefully a fun conversation. It shouldn't be you shouldn't feel any pressure about this concept. If you do, let me know and we can talk about it in a separate meeting. But using a filter is a different approach to the software issue. In the digital age, we have a lot of really great tools, especially in our post-production finishing apps like DaVinci Resolve and Premiere Pro and Final Cut. What are we up to now? 10, 11 in Final Cut. You have a number of tools in there that approximate what in-camera filtration can accomplish. But I want to talk to you about actually doing your filtration for real in camera at the moment that you take your pictures, that you shoot your video. Okay. Because especially among the 5 filters that I'm going to show you, there are at least 3 that don't really render well as digital effects. Okay. And I'm going to point those out to you here in a minute. Okay. But there are some advantages to using filters at the time of image creation. You remember I talked about a concept called baking in a look? I think it was a couple of weeks ago. I brought up that term for the first time, that phrase, baking the look into the image. Okay. You might want to do that for a couple of reasons. The first would be you're going to use a filter that doesn't render well as a digital plugin, and it's better to do in camera at the time. Polarization happens to be one of those. Diffusion happens to be one of those. You also might want to bake in your look for another reason, and that is because the digital pipeline is now very broad, and there are a lot of people. If you work on a production, I'm not talking about your projects here at school, okay? Because here at school, there's probably you and maybe somebody else dealing with the images, and that's probably about it. At most, I think you might have, 2 or 3 people doing post-production work for you. But I doubt that you're not going to be involved in any one of those sittings, right? So if you have somebody doing your audio post for you, you're probably going to sit in on that if it's your film. If you had a cinematographer who's doing a color grade, you're probably going to sit in on that because it's your film. And then, of course, if you have anybody who's really good at like After Effects or something, and you're doing some like green screen cutting in or adding some digital elements, I'm certain that you're going to be sitting in on something like that. So that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about when you get out into the production world, specifically television. And I know that this situation has gotten worse and worse over the years, but in the early beginnings, when we started shooting film for television consumption, and instead of shooting video, I can remember as a young camera assistant listening to conversations that the cinematographers were having with the directors and the assistant directors about how there were too many hands in the pipeline that were adjusting and tweaking things that people shouldn't really be adjusting and tweaking. And it had to do with editors who were doing coloration for the first time as opposed to separate colorists who report to the DP when talking about how to color balance the film in the finishing process. We're talking about engineers in different broadcast markets who receive a signal, a downlink from, let's say you're in Indianapolis, right? But you're the NBC affiliate. Okay, your closest uplink facility might be Chicago, uh, and it's for the Central Time Zone broadcasting network for NBC. And so their programming is coming out. At first, it came from New York. It got beamed to Chicago via satellite. And then Chicago uplinks it to satellite and beams it to all the local affiliates. At every local affiliate, there's going to be an engineer who receives that signal from the broadcaster. And then they're going to run it through time-based correctors, and they're going to run it through um, uh, different kind of machine transfer systems. They're going to boost signal. They're going to do things to color. They're going to take an image that comes down from the satellite that might have some artifacts or something that have to be fixed or dealt with. And so there's a process of like almost secondary color correction that happens at the local level when you're talking about television programming. And so one of the biggest problems that the cinematographers were experiencing was that they would create a look in camera in terms of exposure and possibly filtration, or maybe not filtration. They might have left it for post. But if they create exposures, particularly low key exposures, let's say, or the opposite of that, high key exposures, where there's really hot highlights and very specific exposure criteria that might be something other than, benchmark normal, right? But by the time those shows got to the local level from the affiliates, the local engineers were doing so much tweaking that the images at the broadcast level, the network level from New York and Chicago or LA, when they aired during prime time, they looked different from the local affiliates who might air that programming on cable off peak hours, let's say, or prime time for their time zone, which is different than prime time for the three major networks. And so there would be differences in the way the programming looked. And so that is a strong argument for baking the image into the camera when you shoot it, so that regardless of who is, I'm going to say tampering for lack of a better word, tampering with the images in the pipeline somewhere in post-production, if there's a suggestion of a warm filter or a suggestion of a day for night shot that's very dark and very blue, or if there's a suggestion of, or just for some reason you have done some color correction in camera by virtue of adjusting the CCT or the color balance of your camera to something other than straight daylight or straight incandescent. If you've made an adjustment like that, the suggestion in the image is oftentimes enough for some people down the pipeline to see that something deliberate was done. If you leave, for instance, color correction until post-production, sometimes errors can squeak by, and you'll get a show or a movie where somebody in the DI or in the digital pipeline somewhere didn't understand that they were supposed to color correct a shot. They thought it was, intentional, the deviation from normal, and they let it go. And then, of course, you find out that was an error, right? So I think that baking information into your image, like color saturation or polarization, diffusion, I'm going to talk about some other things like gradual density filters and so forth, and then entering that information on the camera reports when you submit the media to the editor. Then they know that something was done purposefully in camera, and that's the look that was discussed, approved, and expedited on set. Okay, and sometimes those conversations don't happen until photography takes place, and if that's the case, then other people in the pipeline, from the editors to the colorists, even to the people who are maybe conforming media files and just doing dissemination, didn't get the notes, right? Because there was no meeting about it. Okay. It was a discussion that happened at the point of committing to the image, right behind camera, between the DP and the director. Okay. So in those cases, it's really important to make sure that information follows those images or follows those files through the post-production pipeline. Okay. I don't like leaving certain kinds of choices until post-production, because like I said, I think last week, um, if you put off the responsibility for making a creative or aesthetic decision on the day where you're in the moment and you're feeling the shots and you're feeling the scene and you're committing things to camera, and if you put off a decision until post production, where maybe it's several weeks after filming has stopped, you've had time to rest and relax, your brain and your mind are on other things, maybe your next job, or where you're going to go on vacation after post production is done. Maybe you're having a bad day, and so the creative choice that you might have made when you had the opportunity on the day gets deferred to post production, and then in post production you're in a different frame of mind, and that therefore that objective never really happens. Okay. There's a danger in that. So I think that when you're creating images in camera, it's important to go ahead and commit to whatever those things are. That's why you want to have discussions with your director about things like color adjustments and diffusion and things, so that everybody's on the same page and you all agree, and then go ahead and do it, lock it in. And that's what this discussion is about. I have on YouTube a 5 part series, a very in-depth conversation about filters. So today is going to be basically the condensed version of this discussion. If you want to know more, and this is not mandatory, but if you want to know more about filtration, and you really want to get into the nitty-gritty, this discussion on filters at my YouTube site might interest you. Okay. So the whole thing is, I think, what is this? It's like an hour. I think it's just a little bit over an hour discussion on filters. I'm not going to put you through that today as far as these videos are concerned. I'm just going to touch on the more salient points. So check these links out. I'll put them on web courses for you. They're at my YouTube page. So the same page that you go to watch your lectures, the recorded lectures, that's the same place you can find these videos on filters. Okay, filtration for video. So the filter is a camera accessory. It's made out of glass, and it's made out of optical glass. And basically it's going to do something. It's going to do an effect of some kind, and we're going to place it in the optical path in front of the lens, and it's going to render whatever that effect is. It's going to take it all the way to the imager, okay, or all the way to the film stock. Some of them, well, actually, yeah, some of them use accessory holders to attach to the lens or the camera system. Some of them will thread right on the front of your lenses, and I'll show you the difference here in a few minutes. These filters can change the available colors of the image, make the image brighter or darker. They can make the image more blurry, as in diffusion. They can reduce reflections. They can saturate colors. And then I want to show you the different styles that are available that are still functional today. This video I'm going to have you look at from web courses. It's an interview with Ira Tiffin. So this is the fellow who started the Tiffin Filter Company. Some of you, if you're interested in Steadicams, might recognize the Tiffin name, because Tiffin is also the current licensee of the Steadicam product. So they are a filter manufacturer, and they are the Steadicam distributor for at least North America, might be the whole world at this point. So check this out. It's on the videos page in web courses. Ira Tiffin, interesting guy, and he's going to talk to you a little bit about the company, what they do, and then he's going to talk to you a little bit about his 5 favorite filters. So the styles of filters that are out there are threaded rounds, okay? And a threaded round kind of looks like this, okay? This is a threaded round filter. So there's a thread on the back, and it can be screwed onto the front of your lens, okay? We have drop-in rounds, which usually use either a collapsible lens hood or some kind of adapter system, split ring system that will attach to the front of the lens. And then you have series filters that will drop inside of that apparatus. Those are kind of rare now. They were more popular in the 60s and 70s than they are now. Series filters are very hard to get your hands on anymore. Kodak Rat and Gelatin filters, which I don't have with me, but I have some photographs of them. I'll show you. Cut resin filters, and the marquee brand in the cut resin filter market is Koken filters, and I'll show you a couple of those. Those are really terrific filters. And then we have the cut glass filters in 4x4, 4x5, 4x5.5, and 6x6. And those are the kind of filters that we're going to put in our matte box arrangement. Okay, so starting with the threaded rounds, okay, they simply screw right onto the front of whatever we got going on. So if I was using what is this, the Tokina 11-16 cinema zoom, and I wanted to put a threaded round filter on, just make sure that the accessory size of the lens matches the accessory size of the filter. And if I can get this close enough to the camera, I'll show you on the edge, and you can kind of see it here in the presentation. It's got some labeling on the filter rim, okay? But also on the filter rim will be like the accessory size. So you can see here that it says Agfa color or Agfa photo. This is an ultraviolet filter, 77 millimeter. Now that's not a focal length. It's also in millimeters, which can be confusing when you're new to all this stuff, to try and separate in your mind the difference between an accessory size and a focal length. But 77 millimeters is an accessory size. It's the diameter of the filter. Okay, so this is 77 millimeter, made in Japan, Japanese optics. Okay, and it's a piece of quartz glass. It's optically clear. It's perfectly flat. And this one just happens to be an ultraviolet filter, which is essentially clear. It has no real color bias at all. If I show you in front of a white card, you can see how it's virtually clear. There's maybe a little teeny tiny yellowing of the difference, but not much, not a marked difference. It's really just what we call a haze filter, and it's designed to, if you go out and shoot landscapes or wide shots on a really humid or hazy day, the UV can cut through some of that haze and get you back a little bit of clarity into the image in a wider image like a landscape. And so this guy is just going to thread right on the front. The lens is 77 accessory. One of the easiest ways to tell if it's not printed on the lens barrel somewhere, like the Tokinas are really bad about that for some reason. They don't tell you on the lens itself what the accessory size is, but it's on the inside of the lens cap. So if you take a look at the lens cap, you'll see up there in the corner, it's kind of molded into the inside of the cap. You can sort of see a circle with a slash through it, and then the 77. That means it's a 77 mil accessory size. Okay, so you got to get a 77 mil filter for the front of this lens, and it just screws right on the front. So just like that. And now the filter is installed, and you can shoot through it, and it'll give you whatever the effect of the filter is, baked into your image. Okay. There are other filters that are applied the same way. The pictures I have for you here are effect filters. We have a star filter, which will sort of exaggerate point sources of light in the background of your image and make them look like stars. We have a neutral density filter, which I'm going to talk to you more about in a minute, and also a circular polarizer, which I'll also mention to you more in a minute. So circular threaded filters come in a range of sizes, all the way from 37 millimeters up to, you can get them all the way up to 114 millimeters. Those aren't very common. You remember the front of our Zine lens was 114 millimeters. It was very wide in the front of that cinema lens. They do make filters that are threaded that go up that big, but they're incredibly expensive. So in practicality terms, the largest filters that you might buy, like from your local video or photographic retailer, might be either 77 or 82 millimeters. 82 is about the extent of the prosumer consumer filter sizing index. Anything bigger than 82 millimeters is traditionally considered a professional filter. And then, most local retailers won't carry the stuff that's really that big. You have to order it special. B&H in New York City will sell those to you mail order. But I'm going to show you the cut glass filters in a minute, which I think you'll find are far easier to deal with than buying threaded filters at really large sizes like 95, 85, or 114. Okay. So 82 is about as large as you're going to see in the prosumer market. Okay. They screw onto the front of any lens. So the lens will either say on it what the accessory size is. For instance, this Lumix 14 to 42, you can see that inside, printed on the inside of the lens, you can see there's an accessory size there. It says 52 millimeter. Okay, or a circle with a slash through it, and then the number 52. That's the accessory size of this particular lens. So it's on the lens itself, and it's on the inside of the lens cap. If you're not using if you are using threaded filters, one of the things that you're going to find is prohibitive about the kind that thread onto the front of the lenses is, unless all your lenses have the same accessory size, it's going to require you to have a variety of different filter sizes that will thread onto the particular lenses you're using. Once upon a time, in terms of photographic lenses, for instance, you might have a line of lenses like my Olympus still lenses, for instance. Most of those lenses were 49 millimeter accessory size. And this doesn't say it on the front. Where did they put that? This one doesn't have it either, but it's certainly on the inside of the cap. You can see 49, circle with a slash, and 49 millimeter. Okay. And most of the Olympus lenses in that line, like I said, were all 49. They're all the same size. So you only had to buy one size of threaded filters for your whole lens system. And with a couple of exceptions, like anything that was 1.8 or f2 or f2.8, generally they were all 49 millimeters. If you had a lens that was brighter, that opened to a larger f-stop, like a 1.4 or a 1.2, the 50 millimeter 1.2 was 55 millimeter accessory. So for that specific lens, you'd have to have a larger filter size. Or for some of the zoom lenses, like the 65 to 200 in the Olympus line, that filter was, I believe, 58 millimeters. So you might have to have three different sizes of filters. Well, that's not very practical if you're starting to spend, 30, 40, 50, $100 a piece for threaded round filters. So the idea would be you get one size, you get the largest size that you need for your lens system, and then you buy a series of what we call step-up rings. And I have some right here. Here's a nest of step-up rings. Okay, and you'll see they have different sizes printed on the edge of the step-up ring. So for instance, if I had that Olympus 50 millimeter 1.2, and I wanted to use the same filter on that as the 51.8 that I showed you, which was 49, I would have to take a couple of step-up rings. I'd have to go 49 to 52, and then from 52 to 55, use two of these step-up rings, and then take the 55 mil filter, thread it on the larger of the step-up rings, and then I could basically reduce the rings and get it to fit on the 51.8 as well. Okay. And we used to do that a lot with the early cinema glass as well. Before the manufacturers, and Panavision really led the way with this, before the manufacturers started standardizing their accessory sizes, you might have a box full of airy butterfly primes that were built in the 50s or 60s, and they'd have a variety of different filter sizes, and it's just not practical. And even in a situation like that, step-up rings in the television or motion picture workplace are kind of fiddly, and kind of time consuming to use. This is okay for photography or for small video production that has a little bit more time than maybe television production can afford. And so we would go with cut glass filters instead. And I'll show you the cut glass filters in a minute. But the principle here with the step-up rings is there's a step-up ring for basically every size of filter, and it adapts to the next smallest size. So you can go from your, in this nest here, the smallest size is 49, and the largest is 82. So this size is 82 right here, and this was 49. So if I wanted to shoot video with my vintage Olympus lens, that's 49 millimeter accessory, and I wanted to shoot on my Blackmagic Cinema camera, for instance, and all I had were 77 millimeter filters, I'd have to put a big cone of step down rings onto this lens to adapt it to 77 mil, and then screw my 77 on the front. I'd take the 82 mil off, and then take my 77 mil filter and screw that on the front. Okay, and you can do that. Okay, it looks kind of silly, but you can do that if you're dealing with a vintage lens and you're going through all of the iterations of compromise and sacrifice because you like this lens for some reason and you want the look of it. Then this is one way of dealing with that other inherent compatibility problem you're going to have, which is the filter sizes. Folks are doing that if they want to shoot with like the Pocket Cinema camera, for instance, the original one. I mean, this is a great camera. The lenses for it are very, very small. So you could use an Olympus vintage lens on the Pocket Cinema camera and shoot video with it very nicely. And then, of course, you've got to deal with the filter sizes to get around the difference. And one of the perfect examples of that is when we use our polarizing filters, especially our variable polarizing filters, because they tend to only come in like 72, 77, 82 mil. Okay. So that's step up rings, and that's one way of dealing with your threaded filters. Okay. The drop-in series, this is a drop-in filter holder right here for Tiffin series 9 filters. Series 9 filters are designed to cover lenses that are up to 77 millimeters in size. So you have a split ring here, it threads onto the front of your lens, and then the ring opens up and you drop the filter inside and you screw the two rings together, and that's what holds it to the front of the lens. And then sometimes you have this little threaded bud right here, this little standoff. If you had a filter you needed to turn to adjust, like a polarizer, for instance, you controlled it with that little stem there that screws into the outside of the adapter. These, like I said, are pretty much dinosaurs. You don't see them around much anymore. If you ever check out one of the film cameras, for instance, from the UCF operations office, some of those cameras use drop-in filters, and you'll be using the Series 9 adapter for those. But otherwise, you're probably not going to run into this system much anymore. Like I said, I haven't seen series filters in a very long time. And so I wouldn't worry too much about that system particularly. The Rattan system is a little bit different. The Rattan system were the first series of colored filters that came out by Kodak in the 1920s, I guess. They were developed by an English engineer in Great Britain called Fred Rattan. He had, I think it was the first photographic equipment company in Great Britain. And he developed the gel filters for the cameras that he was dealing with. And Kodak bought his company out, I think in 1912, something like that, and acquired the rights to the Rattan filter system. And the Rattan filter system was simply a set of gelatin filters that had all of the different effects that the glass filters of today demonstrate, but it was in a very thin, like a visqueen gelatin material. It came in envelopes, foil envelopes like these. And these are actually a couple of my Rattan gels that I had for the Panaflex cameras. It just so happens that the Panavision film cameras didn't use filters that threaded onto the lenses. We did have matte boxes, and we did have square cut glass filters for the Panavision system to go in the matte box. But there were a couple of basic filter effects that we still used the Ratten filters for, because the film cameras obviously require photographic emulsion as a recording medium. Digital cameras, if you're shooting inside under artificial lighting with your digital video camera, you can set the CCT on the camera, the color temperature. You can set it to indoor lighting, and the images will render as neutrally colored, not too warm, not too blue, just neutrally colored under the artificial lighting. And then when you go outside, if you don't change the settings on the camera, everything outside will look blue in your electronic viewfinder until you change the CC to daylight. And when you change the CC to daylight, the images again will render as neutrally colored, not too warm, not too cool. Okay. Film cameras don't work that way. So you either put film stock in the film camera that was balanced for your artificial studio lights, which was 3200 Kelvin, which we call tungsten balanced, or you put film stock in the camera that was balanced for daylight. And if you didn't want one or the other and you wanted to switch, you had to either change out the magazine for the proper color balance of film stock, which could be a time consuming and wasteful process, or you changed the filtration in the camera from a Ratten blue filter to a Ratten orange filter, or back and forth. Okay, so if we had film stock loaded in the camera because we were shooting on stage all day, and so we were using tungsten lighting fixtures on stage, and we were using film stock balanced to tungsten light. If we were to take that camera outside with the same film stock loaded in it and shot under daylight, the images would come back from the lab looking blue. So the idea was you would put a Ratten, it was called an 85 millimeter filter, which is an orange filter. We'd put that into the Panaflex, into a special slot behind the lens, and it would filter the light coming through, and the images would no longer be blue. They would be properly balanced to neutral, because the filter, the 85 filter that went into the camera, was specifically designed to change daylight balanced light to incandescent balanced light. Okay, it's called an 85 filter, and it went into it. This is an 85 filter, actually. This is an 85 Ratten filter, and you can see here I've got a little filter holder. This actually goes to I think this goes to a Bolex or an Arri camera. But basically, you would cut a little piece of Ratten gel, put it in your filter holder, and then on the Panaflex camera was a little door down by the focus assist, and it's right here. If you follow the red arrow, right down here by the focus wheel, there's a little door, and you had to kind of get your finger in there and slide that door over, and it would reveal a slit. And then you took your filter holder and you just put it right in there, and the gel would go right in and seat itself behind the lens port right here, so that the gel was actually inside the camera. Okay. And so if we wanted to use the 85 filter, we just put it inside the camera like so. That left the two remaining slots in the matte box for cut glass filters of other varieties. So if you got the basic color correction out of the way by using the Ratten gel, then you could use your cut glass filters in the matte box for other things like neutral density, polarization, diffusion, okay, stuff like that. And you weren't wasting a filter slot in your matte box with a basic color correction gel. Okay, so that's the kind of thing we had to go through in the days of film stock. Like I said, now in the days of digital media, it's a flick of a switch or a button on your camera to change the color balance from daylight to tungsten and back again. Okay. The Ratten filters came in a variety of different things, mostly blue and orange filters for basic color correction. No effects filters were put behind the lens in the Ratten slot. Sometimes neutral density could be put in there if you needed the trays in the matte box free for other styles of filters, but they were kind of rare. I think I've got one of these is, yeah, these are actually both neutral density filters, an ND6 and an ND 0.1. Okay. If it was an 85 color correction, it would say 85 right here. Okay. Okay. So those were the Ratten filters. Now the cut resin filters, these are fun. Koken filters are a lot of fun, namely because they're very inexpensive and pretty easy to get online. They use a filter holder. Okay, so you can see here, there's an adapter ring, which is kind of similar to the step-up rings, except it doesn't step up. It's just the size of the lens you want to use. Okay, and then it's got a flange on it that fits into the filter holder itself. So essentially, you could have a variety of adapter rings and just one holder and one set of square filters, square resin filters, and you don't have to have all the different sizes. You just have to have a series of different rings to accommodate the different lenses you might be using. Let me show you what a Koken filter looks like. So they come in a little sort of protective case like this, and inside you have this little cut resin filter. And down in the very corner of the filter, you can see it says Koken, and then it has a catalog number. This is P26. P stands for the size of filter. So Koken had two different series of filters. They had the P series professional, okay, and that'll cover lenses up to, there you go, 77 millimeter, right? And then they had the A series, which was amateur, okay, and that would cover lenses from 37 to about 58 or 62. I guess it was 62 millimeters. And they were about 2/3 of the size of the P series filter. They were quite a bit smaller, okay. But the P series filters, when the manufacturers started coming out with very long zoom lenses like the 70 to 210 millimeter zooms, a lot of those were 72 and sometimes 77 mil accessory on the front, and so the A series filters weren't big enough. So I just went right to the P series for Koken when I was a photographer, so that I had all the sizes I needed covered under the P series with the same filter holder. And I just bought a whole series of rings based on what lens I was going to use it on. And these kind of work almost like the matte box. There's these little channels, these little grooves, and the filter just sort of fits in those grooves like so. You push it down and it's held into place by these little sort of plastic spring-loaded arms here. I don't know if you can see them or not. And it holds the filter in place just like a matte box, okay, which is pretty cool. So if you have, so here's my Tokina lens again, my 77 mil example here. If I'm using my Tokina, I just thread the Koken filter ring on the front of the lens and then put my filter holder on there. And now I can go out and shoot with Koken filters on the front of my cinema zoom or my prime lens. And there's about 150 different kinds of Koken filters. So you've got color effects filters, special effects filters, color correction filters, diffusion filters, neutral density filters, polarizers. You got the whole catalog available in Koken cut resin. Okay, and these filters are about I think even now, if you buy them like on Amazon, they're only about like $30 a piece, $35 a piece. Okay, which is not too terribly bad when you consider that a lot of the threaded filters are anywhere between 20 and 150, $200 for, depending on what type of screw-in filter you're looking at. So these are actually a really inexpensive option in terms of filtration. And they're resin, which is basically, it's a form of plastic, but it's photographic resin. So it has an optical clarity to it that regular plastic doesn't have. Okay, so you can shoot through it without worrying about the filter affecting the sharpness or quality of the lens you're working with. So if you got a really expensive lens, some photographers would worry about putting a cheap filter in front of a really expensive lens. And the logic was, well, if I go to all the trouble of renting or buying a really expensive, super sharp photographic or video lens, and then I put a $20 filter in front of that lens, am I degrading the image? And in some cases, you could say, yes, that's true. And in some cases, there's not much really to worry about. But the logic is fairly sound. So that would be why you would have companies, for instance, like here's a B&W warming filter, it's called. And basically what it's designed to do is just put a little bit of warm color bias over your image. It's kind of like, maybe using a pair of Ray-Bans, when you go outside. They're not just sunglasses, but they also have a color tint to them. This is a warming filter, so this will make skin tones look a little bit more tanned, and a little bit less washed out, especially if you have somebody who doesn't get outside a whole lot and they need to look a little bit healthy. Put a warming filter on and it will kind of give them a more pleasing complexion. This is made by the B&W Filter Company, okay? And it's made in Germany. So this is from some of the finest shot glass, SCHOTT, which is a very old glass company from Germany that's been around since the early 1800s when Zeiss started their lens manufacturing facility. And a filter like this, 77 millimeter, you can see it on the inside of the filter flange, 77 millimeter, 81A, it says. That's a warming filter catalog designation. This filter is about $180. Okay. This little guy here, the UV filter, was about 20 bucks. Okay. So, there's a very disproportionate pricing structure to these threaded filters based on brand and based on what the filter actually does. Okay. So that's what makes the Koken filters, kind of a nice value. And I had a handful of them here to show you. So, for instance, this was a warming filter. If you ever wanted to shoot, if you wanted your images to look a little cooler than normal, here's a what we call a cooling filter, or an 82 series filter. And it is slightly blue. Okay. So you had the warming filter, which was slightly yellowish, goldenish, and then you have the cooling filter, which is slightly bluish, to give you that sort of cool tone tint to everything. You can see kind of what it does just to my skin tone here. If I move it around, you can kind of see, give you a split image there under the cooling filter and not, right? So it'll just lend a little bit of cooler color quality to the image. Now, yes, you can do this in camera with your CCT adjustment, but most cameras, it's a big deal to go into the menus and then access that CCT adjustment to go off of the standard, which is straight daylight or straight tungsten. Okay, usually you have two presets on the camera, which is a flick of the switch on the outside of the camera. But if you wanted to go to something other than those particular presets, you had to go into the menu system and then dick around with it a little bit. It's kind of a hassle. So sometimes it's quicker just to throw, something like that on front of the camera. Okay, so you can go with things like the Koken system, and they're very nice. Cover up to 82 millimeters in accessory size, not really expensive. You don't need as many of the filter holders. You need a handful of rings, and then you can get one set of filters. Makes it very economic. Okay. The Koken catalog, the Koken has a website, and they used to have a paper catalog, and they would give it out with every basic set of Koken filters. So a basic set was a ring of a particular size, usually 52 or 58 or 62. And then you got a filter holder, and then you got the catalog, which gave you the whole rundown on what was available in the series. Now that catalog is online at koken.com. So you can just go straight to their website and see all the different types of filters that they make. Okay. The last set of filters I want to talk to you about are cut glass. Okay. And so these look like Koken filters, but they're a little bit bigger and they're made out of tempered glass. So I got a set of them right here that I'll show you. And basically, the cut glass filters will come in a nice Cordura wallet. I'll show you an optical flap, which is basically a a photographically clear, optically transparent protective filter. And this is what a cut glass filter looks like. So it's quite thick, right? It's about 3/16 of an inch thick, not quite a quarter of an inch. Almost as thick as the threaded 77 mil filter. Okay, as thick as the flange itself. It's a very thick filter, so it most of the time will survive a fall to the floor if the floor is not concrete. So I've actually, I don't think it was this one, but one of my optical flats, I've actually dropped on the stage floor a couple of times, and it just bounced right off the floor, and I caught it in midair, and it didn't break, it didn't crack, and I think one of them has just a very, very small chip out of it. They're very, very durable. They're tempered glass, and it's a sandwich, right? The optical flat is just clear glass, so this is just one piece. But any cut glass filter that has an effect is usually a sandwich of two pieces of glass, and the effect has been applied either through vellum or through spray, or through dye, and then they trap that effect in between two sandwiches of optically clear glass, which adds to the strength and durability of the filter. But if you drop it on concrete, 6 out of 10 times you're going to break your filter. Okay. Now, the unfortunate reality about cut glass filters is they're kind of pricey. Okay, so you can see this one says Tiffin Clear. Okay, USA. That just, that's just what that filter color effect is. And this filter in 4x4 inches cost me $125. Okay, it doesn't do anything. It's just clear. Okay, but what I use it for is for ordnance. Like if we're going to do a shot and they're going to fire a gun towards the lens, or if there's a stunt happening and there could be shards or scraps of flying debris that might hit the front of the camera, I'll take an optical flat and I'll put it in the matte box, and that'll protect the front of the lens from being damaged. If I break the optical flat, it's $125. If I destroy my, for instance, Tokina 11-16, that's going to cost me $1,900 to replace it. So it's sometimes a better idea to break the optical flat than to destroy your cinema zoom. Okay, and to put it in the matte box, I pull the filter tray out of the matte box, and there's these little sort of crow's feet down here that'll hold the glass in place. So I just drop it in there and pull the tab up so it captures the filter so it won't fall out. And then that whole stage, it's called filter stage, goes right back into the matte box in the slot, like so, like that. And now I got my optical flat installed in the matte box. And when I put the matte box on the camera, I've got a protective layer between my lens and whatever's happening in front of the camera. Okay. The ones you see in the photograph here are called graduated filters, or grads. Okay. Some of these look like this one in the foreground here looks like it might be a neutral density grad or a gray grad. The one behind it, it looks like a sunset grad, purple sunset. You got an orange sunset behind that. You got a dark orange sunset above it. You've got a coral filter off to the left. You can see there's a blue color correction filter deep in the background. This one here looks like a tobacco color correction, a sepia, in other words, sepia filter. So you got all these different styles of cut glass. The ones that I pulled here to talk about today are the standard ones that Ira Tiffin likes. And so, in other words, he talked about the 5 of his 5 favorite filters, which he calls the 5 essential filters. One of them was the optical flat, okay, and that was the protective cut glass filter. He also likes the grad filters. So here is a coral grad. Coral is like a salmon color or slightly pink. Okay, and grad means there is an effect on the filter at the top, but not at the bottom of the filter. So you can kind of see where this filter's clear at the bottom and the effect is only on the top. Okay. So I'm going to show you a little snippet of video here in a few minutes where imagine you put this filter in the matte box and you covered only the sky, okay, with this coral effect filter, right? So you could make the sky look like it was sunset even if it wasn't quite exactly that time of day yet, okay? Or let's say you get a really boring sunset, right? A hazy sunset that doesn't really have a lot of color or a lot of character to it, and the scene called for a warm romantic sunset, and you planned on it, and the weather forecast said you were going to get that kind of a shot at sundown, but it just didn't happen. Okay, you can use that grad filter and sort of through in camera subtle coloration make it kind of look like you got that sunset after all, even though it was kind of a hazy, not very impressive finale. Here is a Paradise Blue Paradise Blue grad. The same thing goes for your regular old skies outside. So you'll notice sometimes, especially with the DSLRs or the mirrorless cameras, how the dynamic range of the camera is not quite enough to give you a blue sky and good bright detail in the foreground of a shot you're doing outside. Your skies get washed out. One of the things you can do to help fix that is use a blue grad, and this is a very subtle. It's called Paradise Blue. It puts a very nice blue tone in the sky. If you get one of those sort of hazy blown out skies with your DSLR, you can use a color grad to restore a little bit of that blue sky to your image. This is only a grade 1, okay? The density of the filter, in other words, how much color is present, will come in grades. And with color filters, it's generally grades 1 through 5, okay? The coral grad that I showed you was a grade 3, so it was fairly dense in terms of the color saturation. This Paradise Blue grad is only a grade 1, so it's very subtle. So there's a grade 2 and a grade 3 and a grade 4, which will get bluer, deeper blue on top as you increase the grade, okay? So these can be a really fun filter to play with, and they can really help you, especially if you're using a DSLR and you don't have a lot of latitude in your camera. You don't have a lot of dynamic range, because a DSLR generally has a dynamic range of about 10, which is not real great. So you might get a lot of blown out skies, and you can fix them with Paradise Blue grads, FYI. The other kinds of cut glass filters, the most popular kind are neutral density. And neutral density filters are almost essential in the digital cinema realm. In the days of film, where the sensitivities were quite a bit lower than what we're dealing with now in terms of camera ISOs, neutral density filters were less necessary, and certainly not as dense as they have to be now. What we have are film stocks that were very low in sensitivity, and so we needed just a little bit of neutral gray to introduce into the image to get the exposure to balance. Some of the cameras that are out now that have native ISOs of, like the Sonys, are all 3200 ISO, which is fairly sensitive capture device. And in that case, when you go outside, even if you can control the f-stop of your lens and close that diaphragm all the way down to its smallest opening, a lot of times the images can still look too bright or over bright or blown away, obviously, from too much exposure. So what you might want to do is something that I call putting sunglasses on your lens, right? Or add a neutral density filter to your matte box, okay? And what it'll do is reduce the exposure of the amount of light coming through your lens, just like sunglasses would do if you put them on over your eyes on a really bright sunny day, right? It just knocks down the amount of light coming through the lens and helps your camera balance for a better exposure, okay? I'm going to talk to you about exposure week after next and how filters can play a role in calculating exposure. But for now, just think of neutral density filters as sunglasses for your lens. This is a single f-stop reduction of light, okay? It would be the same thing as if you were exposing with your cinema lens, let's say, and you set your lens to say a 5.6, okay? When you put that neutral density filter on there, you would change your f-stop to a 4 maybe, okay? It's a 1 f-stop reduction in the amount of light coming through the lens, okay? Or I'm sorry, it would be like going from a 4 to a 5.6, okay? From a 4 to a 5.6. You can get those in various grades. I usually carry just a 3 and a 6. So it's a 1-stop reduction, and an ND6 or a neutral density 0.06 is a 2-stop reduction in exposure. And if you look at that against white, you'll see it's darker than the N3 because this is a 2-stop reduction in exposure. Okay, so where the N3 reduces the amount of light coming in by 1/2 through your lens. Okay, see if I can do this all with hands. Okay, the N6 is 2 stops. Okay, so it's twice as dense, and it's allowing only a quarter of the amount of light to come through the lens. This was half. This is a quarter of the amount of light coming through the lens. It's reducing the amount of light coming through the lens and making your exposure darker. Okay, and that can help a lot if you have a camera with a really sensitive image device, and you go outside and just everything you try to photograph is just blown out because the camera is too sensitive. Then you're going to need these neutral density filters. And these are cut glass neutral density filters. The one in the image here on the screen is this is an ND, I think it's an ND12 or an ND16. Very dense filter, very dark gray. And you can see right here, you can't even really see the white background behind the filter. It's so dense. Okay, these are for the really sensitive cameras that are out there, like the Sony FS5, FS6, FS7. Those cameras are native ISOs of 3200. Very, very sensitive imaging device. So you need these dark neutral density filters. Okay. You can also do it in a threaded filter. This is a K&F Concepts variable ND filter, and I'll show you. This would be a little bit of a trick, but I'll show you if I can figure out how to hold this. I'm going to turn. It's a split ring. I don't know if you can see that if I get this up close. You see how there's a series of like little dots on the lens on the outside of the filter, and they're very small dots and very big dots, and then you've got a knurled ring on the inside. So basically what you would do is you'd thread this onto the front of your lens. I'll take off my Koken adapter here. Thread this variable neutral density filter on the front of your lens, and you'd fasten it using the knurled ring, and then turn the outside ring to adjust the density. You see how you can kind of see the elements inside of my lens right now, and as I turn it, it gets really dark. Okay, that's a variable neutral density filter. If I take it off and show you against white what's happening here, you can get a sense of what this is doing. You see that? So you have the equivalent of several neutral density filters in this one variable filter. So instead of changing out cut glass filters, what you might consider doing is just getting one of these and threading it on the front of your cinema lens, and then use the adjustable ring to change the density of the neutral effect, okay, or the exposure reduction effect. So if you have, there's a little witness mark on the very top on the knurled ring right here, that triangle. So a little tiny mark like that is the least amount of neutral density. And as that little mark gets bigger, you're getting denser and denser until you get to the maximum, which is really dark. Okay. So this would be a really, really bright day with a really natively sensitive camera. Okay. Shooting outside, and you wanted to use an aperture that was wider, let's say, than f16 or f22. You can control the brightness of your image with your f-stop, okay, on your lens. You can do that. And if you go outside and you find that T3 is too bright and you close down your aperture, you're making that hole smaller. And in essence, you're balancing out the density of the image. You can do that. But when you do that, when you make that aperture, that diameter smaller and smaller and smaller, you're increasing the amount of sharpness between the foreground and the background. And there might be times when you don't want to have all that information in clear focus, right? If you want your subject to be sharp, but the background to be blurry, you can't do that shooting at f22. It's just not going to work. Your background's going to be almost as sharp as your foreground. Okay, so using a neutral density filter like this will allow you to then go back down the f-stop scale to something a little bit more pleasing in terms of your depth of focus. Okay, you can be down here in the lower numbers, maybe in the single digits, to get that soft out of focus background thing that everybody really likes. Okay, I know that I'm speaking about some stuff that you may not have come into contact with yet, or you're not familiar with. More of this will become clear to you when we talk about exposure the week after the midterm. Okay. It's almost impossible to have this conversation without having the exposure conversation first. But if I have the exposure conversation first, it can be equally as confusing, and it's a much more dense concept. And I think easing into it through talking about filters first helps, especially talking about neutral density filters. So just bear with me if you're getting a little bit lost in terms of this conversation. The last kind of filter I want to talk to you about is the polarizer. And let me move through my presentation here a little bit. These are Panavision filters, incidentally. This is a whole set of neutral density filters for a Panavision camera. They're 4 by 5.65 inches, and they fit into the Panavision matte box. So they're slightly more rectangular than my square cut glass filters, so that they can handle anamorphic lenses. So you can have one threaded variable ND filter, or you could have a whole wallet full of these neutral density cut glass filters. The choice is really up to you. Some of the DPs that are out there that are old school, that have been doing this for a really long time, prefer to do things this way because they're just used to it, and that's how they want to deal with it. And if you end up being their camera assistant, you'll have to learn what this stuff is and how to deal with it, because that DP will insist on doing it the old school way. Okay. If you're just doing it for you, though, I think this is the smartest way to go, at least in the beginning, because you're only buying one filter as opposed to a whole wallet full of filters that might cost you quite a bit of money. My 4x4 ND filters were these were almost $300 a piece for this, and it seems like a lot of money for not very much, but it's a pretty expensive filter. Because it's 4 by 4 inches, it's optical glass that's been tempered and heat treated. It has a prescribed calibrated exposure reduction effect built into it. And I can apply it to a variety of different size lenses. So, and it's made by Tiffin. So that brand is, characteristically not cheap. But that's what it is. I bought this filter probably 25 years ago. So it's paid for itself. But initially the investment's a little shocking. So, to buy a whole box full of filters like I got behind me, you're looking at a couple $1,000s of initial investment, maybe more. There's probably about, I think I have 30 filters in there at $300 or more a piece. So what does that tell you? That's like a lot of money. So keep it all, treat it all with a grain of salt. Here's a 6x6-inch filter. The Arri large format matte boxes come in 6x6 if you're shooting IMAX, or if you're shooting large format anamorphic like they did on the Hateful Eight, for instance, or the Revenant. You're probably going to be using a 6x6 matte box because the lenses have a wider peripheral field of view. So you need a bigger filter. So it's not vignetting, it's not in the shot. For the Ursa Minis, we have the UCF bought the Vocus, which look basically identical to my Schneider matte box. They look like this, and they have two filter stages in them. There's a reduction ring in the back. The initial size in here is 95 millimeters. The ones at school are 114. And then they have a little cowled reduction ring in here. This is 95 to 82. And then I go 82 to 77 step-up ring. I don't know if you can see that on there. Okay. So there's my 77 to 82. And that just sort of pops in like that. And then there's this little cam lock that will hold that ring in place. Your cinema lens threads on the front. So here's my GH5 with 20 to 70 cinema lens and 77 millimeter accessory threaded into the Schneider matte box. Okay, so you can kind of see how that situation works right there. Okay, and then you guys saw something similar on the Ursa Mini last week when I talked to you about lenses. I want to talk to you a little bit about matte boxes. So there's a few different kinds of matte boxes. So you can have some lenses will come with just a hood, it's called, which is a removable sort of light deflector that'll protect the front of the lens from getting hit by, stray sunlight outside, but not really fully effective. The matte boxes are a little bit more effective in that they block a little bit more of the light, and you have an eyebrow you can actually attach to the top of this thing to give you like the peak or the visor on a baseball cap. And that'll give you a little bit of extra sun protection when you're outside. Okay. These matte boxes that I use most of the time mount to the rods and then to the front of the lens. And I explained that to you guys in week 3 when we built the camera the first time. It's to keep the whole unit as one durable piece and not have any sort of loose components that won't handle well when the cameras are being thrown around on the set on a busy day, for instance. But there's a certain kind of matte box, and I've got one right here I can show you called a swing away. Okay. Let me go back for a minute to my full screen so I can see what I'm doing. The swing away matte box is designed to, I can't see myself anyway. It's designed to wing right away from the lens. It's not connected to the front of the lens at all. And the idea is to facilitate a quick lens change. So if I had to do a quick lens change on this camera with this matte box, I'd have to remove the matte box from the rods, unscrew the cowling from the front of the lens, change the lens on the camera to something else, screw the cowling back on to that new lens, and then put everything back together and mount everything to the rods. That can be a slow process. So this kind of matte box is best with a cinema zoom where you're not changing lenses very often. Okay, but if you're shooting with only prime lenses, okay, the thing about a prime lens is it's not very big. So it doesn't place a lot of stress on the lens flange. It's not very heavy, right? And it's fairly compact and small. So, but if you've only got, one focal length per lens and you got to change lenses every time you want to change the field of view, that can get, kind of tedious and time consuming. And so this kind of matte box would add additional time to a lens change, which might get your assistant directors or your directors a little impatient while they wait for you to change lenses on the set. So you could use a swing away matte box. And what it's designed to do is by pulling this little plunger up right here in the back, okay, I can swing the lens right away from the camera, and I can change the lens out and have the matte box completely swung out of the way where it's not getting in the way of my lens change. Then I can simply go in, take my lens out, put my new lens on, and then swing the matte box back in place, and we're ready to go. Okay. But a swing away matte box is not attached to the lens in the front, and you can see how it moves around quite a bit. So if you were to grab this matte box, if that camera was headed towards the floor and you reached out and grabbed for it and grabbed onto the swing away matte box, you could do even more damage to the matte box on the way to the floor and not really save the camera from taking a dive. Whereas this one, I think I showed you the other day, I picked it right up by the matte box, that Ursa Mini that weighed about 30 pounds, and nothing really happened. So if you're throwing cameras around in a real fast-paced environment, like doing car work or helicopter work or something where the cameras are moving on and off of devices a lot, put a zoom on the camera and then lock your matte box in with a rod-based matte box system. But if you're shooting with primes and changing lenses a lot because you're shooting on set, and it's maybe a talking head movie or real dramatic dialogue driven thing, and you want to get a lot of different points of view through prime lenses, a swing away matte box might be the way to go for you to make your lens changes a little easier. Okay. So that's the other style of matte box. And then there is a third style of matte box that just threads onto the front of the lens itself. But those are very infrequently used. About the only time we use, we call it a clip-on matte box. About the only time we use those would be for certain kinds of Steadicam work or certain kinds of handheld work. But the clip-on matte box offers absolutely no security for the front of the lens or the filters for that matter. And they can go flying right off the front of the lens if you don't have them attached properly. So we don't use those very often. Mostly Steadicam operators use them because then they don't have to worry about the additional weight of rods and rod bases. They can take the camera and go straight to their top stage of the Steadicam and reduce a lot of weight, because usually with a Steadicam operator, it's about making the camera as light as possible. And then they might go with a clip-on matte box and a wide prime because the Steadicam operators don't need necessarily a zoom lens. Most of them will work with a 35 millimeter lens if it's a Super 35 camera. In the case of Micro Four Thirds, you would be using a 12 or 16 millimeter lens. And that's about it, because at the distances a Steadicam likes to be from a moving subject, which is anywhere from, say, 4 to 5 feet away, okay, the 35 millimeter perspective is perfect. It gives you a nice loose single, almost a medium, which is kind of a nice size if you're following somebody down a hallway or leading somebody down a hallway, like Captain Kirk and Mr. Spock are walking down the Enterprise in the hallway. You can get a full wide shot of them walking, but do you really need to see top to bottom, head to foot? If they're talking about something really interesting, you want to be inside of the action. You want to be in here. So at 4 feet away from Captain Kirk and Mr. Spock on a 35, it's perfect for the Steadicam. So usually we wear a 35 first, and we lens that for a couple of rehearsals and see if that focal length is the best. And then we probably stay with it. If it's a little tight, we'll go a little bit wider, or if it's a little loose, we'll ask the Steadicam to follow a little closer, or we'll put the next tighter lens on the camera. But usually we ask him to follow closer first. Okay, say 3 feet away. Okay. On a wide angle lens at 3 feet away, you still get enough depth of field that the focus puller is not going crazy, and you get a little bit of your background in focus. And so, and if the actors deviate a little bit in their distancing from the camera, it's not so problematic for the focus puller to keep everything sharp. Okay. You don't want to be on a long lens on a Steadicam because you get such a narrow zone of focus that if the actors speed up or slow down outside of the depth of field, which I'll talk to you about in 2 weeks, the focus puller is going to buzz the shots a lot. They're not going to be totally sharp. Okay. So there's reasons for all of this. There's a logic that will start to come together over time as you study this stuff and we talk about it more and more just understand that a Steadicam lens, usually a 35 mil, and it's a clip-on matte box. Otherwise, you're using one of these two situations, okay? Let me go back to sharing my presentation. Okay, so here's a little quick, it's not a GIF, but it's just a couple of seconds of changing the filter stages in the matte box. So you just pull them out, you add your filter to it, and then you drop them in. So these matte boxes hold 2 filters in the top, in the stage. Okay, there's two filter stages in here. Some of them hold 3. My Red Rock Swing Away holds 3 filters in the stages. Okay, and it's expandable, so I could expand this out to, I believe, 8 by ordering additional stages, and they all screw together. Okay, so I could have a whole stack of glass filters in here if I wanted to, which is not very common. About the only guys who are doing that anymore would be an old school DP who shoots commercials, like, you know, maybe car commercials or cosmetic commercials. Because then they're stacking different grades of things like diffusion, maybe for cosmetic commercial, so that you know, they get a certain filter formula that they go with that the client really likes, and it might involve more than 1 or 2 basic filters. It might involve 4 or 5 filters deep. Okay, but it's kind of rare. It's an old school way of dealing with a problem. Like I said, we have digital tools now that can solve some of this. It's also just kind of a lost art that not many people are doing anymore. So it's kind of rare to have a matte box that'll hold more than 2 or 3 filters. I showed you the Swing Away. This is a Swing Away. This is, yeah, that's a Red Rock Swing Away. It has on around it, you can see the eyebrow, we call it. That's the top light deflector, right? Like the bill or the peak of your ball cap. It also has what we call dog ears that you can attach to the side, which will kill any light spill coming into the matte box from the sides of the camera. Like if you're out on the beach around the water and you get a lot of crazy reflections coming from all different angles, the dog ears and the eyebrow are nice outside at a place like the beach to keep a lot of that stray light from flaring the lens. Okay. This is just a basic matte box, like I just showed you, 2-stage matte box. This one looks like it's a Croziel maybe. Different manufacturers for these matte boxes. Some of them can be very pricey. These matte boxes that I typically use, these were the first matte boxes that I bought. Gosh, 25 years ago, I bought these, and they cost me about $1,200 a piece. Okay, now you can get a matte box for as little as, you know, $150, $200. Okay, there's a few differences. This one's made very well, and $1,200 over 25 years. I think I got my money's worth out of this matte box. That's only about $50 a year if you really do the math on it. But it's very durable. It's been very reliable. It was made out of quality parts, and it was manufactured at a time when there weren't 50 different manufacturers out there making matte boxes. Now you can go on Amazon and you can buy a matte box from, you know, a whole slew of different vendors that make accessories for cameras, because the market and the industry has kind of exploded into the consumer realm, and we have more people buying this gear than we ever did before. So you can spend as much as you want on this. I recommend renting if you're not sure what you want or need, and then buy only when you know what qualities you like in a matte box and what qualities you need or don't need, and then purchase only what you need to do the job. Okay. So the different styles of effect that you can achieve with these filters. These are color correction filters. I talked to you a little bit about that already. Warming filters, cooling filters, and then basic color effects. The pink filter here will adjust the green spike in fluorescent lighting when you go inside like a bank that's lit with fluorescence, or inside a school lit by fluorescence, right? You can put a magenta filter in front of the lens. It's a very subtle, maybe more like this grade right here, but it will filter out the weird green light that comes out of an industrial fluorescent fixture, okay? Either that, or you can put color correct tubes in the lights. Ask your gaffer will solve that problem for you. with a set of color corrected tubes by somebody like Kino Flow or Visions and Color, for instance. But if you don't have the luxury of a gaffer or a gaffer who's familiar with that technique, you can put a fluorescent filter or a magenta filter on the lens and filter out the green spike from an industrial shop light, for instance. Diffusion filters. So color correction filters are easy to do in post now, especially if you shoot in a raw compressionless codec, like on a Blackmagic cinema camera or on an Arri camera or a Red camera. If you're shooting a raw codec, you can do all the color correction you want in post with very little loss of quality or color science in the process. But diffusion is different. Diffusion really needs to be done in camera because the effects right now that they have for diffusing the image in post-production have a tendency to look very artificial. And there's only a couple of different grades of diffusion in the digital variety versus the in-camera variety, where there are literally dozens of different kinds of diffusion filters. These are called Wilson Superfrost, and this is going to be a hard video to look at in my presentation here because it's so small. But you might see a variation in density here between the different grades of diffusion filter. These are old school filters. They're not made anymore. There's a number of guys in Hollywood that have sets of these. They're very highly sought after because they have a very subtle and pleasing effect. The image will still appear sharp through the diffusion filter, but as you can see here, the frost filters are affecting the background. You see without the filter, and then you apply the filter, what happens to the density of the shadows in the background. It can have the effect of extending the dynamic range of your camera's capture device and also applying sort of a pleasing softening of the image without losing the apparent sharpness you would need, like around the eyes, for instance, of somebody's close-up. Okay, diffusion filters are used a lot of times on older actresses who are starting to get subconscious about their complexion and how they might get age lines, laugh lines around the eyes or around the mouth. Okay, a diffusion filter a lot of times will help smooth that out to the point where you can make somebody look 10, 15 years younger just by applying the right kind of diffusion filter to the lens. And I'll tell you what, an actress that makes a lot of money on a movie and you can apply the right diffusion filter to and make her look 15 years younger, that person is going to speak very highly of you and you'll probably get a lot of work as a result of it. Okay, because at the end of the day, an actress that makes 10 or $20 million for a movie, like a Meryl Streep, for instance, if you can make that person look good, you're going to get a lot of work out of that, okay? Because she is a product at the end of the day. I mean, Meryl Streep, the person, is the private individual. Meryl Streep, the actress, is a product. And a product is something that, if you sell it well, you're going to work a lot, okay? Just keep that in mind. These are edge markings on the diffusion filters. They tell you what grade of density the diffusion is. I photographed the corner of this filter just so you could kind of see what the diffusion effect looks like on the surface of the filter itself. It almost looks gritty, like there's sand on the glass or something. And that's the diffusion. The diffusion on Superfrost was applied as an aerosol. Okay, and so it'll have a droplet consistency to it if you were to look at it close under a microscope. This, I looked under a stack of close-up filters so I could show you the detail at the corner of this filter, okay? And they have different densities. This one here, you can actually kind of see streaks in the diffusion effect, okay? All of this adds to the softening of the filter. But the idea that this is done kind of in streaks like this is where the semi-sharp appearance of the filter comes from, because it's not just a complete diffusion density evenly applied all the way across the glass. It's been randomly applied so that some parts of the filter are clearer than other parts of the filter. And that's, in essence, what diffusion is doing. This video I also have embedded for you in web courses, and it's the Tiffin diffusion test they did a couple of years ago. It's about 20 minutes long, and they go through a whole series of diffusion filters with two models. So we have two women. one woman of color, one Caucasian woman. So you can see the difference in diffusion between the differences in skin tone. And then they show you the difference in diffusion based on the different styles of diffusion. And it's a comparative side-by-side sort of split video with and without the filter. It's a very interesting video if you're into this notion of diffusion and softening effects and beauty photography. You might find this very enlightening. The next kind of filter, we call them diopters or close-up filters. I have one here set aside to show you. It's like putting a magnifying glass in front of the lens. You can see how this one has kind of a curved surface to it. It's like a magnifying glass, right? So let's say you're shooting with, I don't know, whatever this is a 12, so it goes to about 2 feet, I think, is the minimum focusing distance. Oh, 3/4 of a foot. Okay, so you can get 8 inches away from your subject with this lens, but let's say 8 inches away wasn't close enough. Let's say you're shooting a close-up of, I don't know, maybe it's you guys seen Barton Fink, DP Roger Deakins? The lens starts at the drain of a sink and pulls up and out and pulls out into the room really wide. Okay. In order to get that close-up shot of the drain, he probably had to be closer than the minimum focusing distance of his lens. Most of the time, the wide angles can get very close, but most of the time, like a 50 mm lens, you can get about 2 feet away from your subject. But that's not close enough to shoot, you know, the drain in your sink. So you might put this close-up filter on the front of your lens, and this is a +2 density. So this might get me a foot away with this filter attached. Okay. And if I stack a +1 and a +2, I might be able to get a half a foot away from the drain in the sink. Okay. So you can stack these and add to the magnification effect. But basically, what these close-up diopters will do is keep decreasing your minimum focusing distance, and they get you closer and closer and closer to your subject. So if you want to shoot a bug on a leaf, right? Without the close-up filters, chances are your lens, unless it's a macro lens, is not going to be able to get you close enough to make that bug look impressive in the frame. So you use a close-up diopter or a stack of close-up diopters, a combination of several strengths, and get that lens right up next to the action. Okay, that's a close-up filter. These are a lot of fun, these close-up filters, and you can increase the size of an image in post. That's very true. But a lot of times when you magnify your video image in post, you introduce noise or grain into the image because it's not designed to be blown up past maybe 20 or 30% before you start seeing a degradation of the image. A close-up filter happens in camera, so you maintain the same resolution while magnifying the image in camera. Okay, so there's definitely an advantage to using a close-up filter in the moment as opposed to just increasing the magnification of your image in post. Okay, you won't damage your video that way. Okay, so this is a video on how to use diopters. This is also embedded in web courses. There's about 6 filter how-to videos embedded in web courses, and you can check those out at your leisure. The next filter I want to talk to you about is the neutral density filter. Okay, neutral density filters, like I said before, are kind of like putting sunglasses on your cinema lens. And you can see here, under normal conditions, a normal exposure is the left-hand test strip on this image, right? It looks properly balanced, not too bright, not too dark. But as you add layers of neutral density, the image gets darker and darker, okay? Now, the idea is not to make your images darker per se, but if you're under really, really bright conditions and simply by closing your f-stop down, you can't get a pleasing balance to your exposure, you're going to have to start adding sunglasses to the lens to reduce the overall amount of light hitting the sensor of your camera. Okay. And so the different grades, the darkness, if you can translate this into a reduction rather than making your image darker, this might be exactly what you need if you're shooting on the ski slopes of Aspen on a sunny day where there's snow on the ground and there's so much light in the ambient environment that closing your lens down all the way at your lowest camera sensitivity is still not enough. You might need to put something as dense as an ND8 on your camera lens. Okay. Here's a quick video example of that. So I went out to the beach here yesterday and I photographed one of the intercoastal bridges leading to, this bridge goes from Titusville out to SpaceX. And so it was a very bright day and I'm around water. So there's a lot of light kicking off the water. The sky is very bright. It's a concrete bridge and it's reflecting light like crazy, like a sidewalk would do out on the city street. There's just a lot of light everywhere. Okay. And even though I could change the f-stop, I could close the f-stop down to, I was on this camera system right here. So with this lens and this matte box, I can close the iris down to T22 and make the image look pretty good. And maybe for this, because the subject is so far away and it's a bridge with a lot of fine detail, T22 is acceptable. But for some reason, let's say I didn't want to shoot at T22. For instance, believe it or not, some lenses suffer a loss of quality at a really small f-stop. Okay. And so we want to shoot with a cinema lens at the sweet spot of the lens. Well, the sweet spot of the lens is around 4, 5, 6, maybe 8. Okay. Beyond that, in either direction, if you get wider, you lose depth of field. And if you get smaller, the image can actually start depreciating in terms of its detail or sharpness. So I wanted to be at an 8. So I set the lens to an 8 and the image didn't really get much darker. Okay, but what I could do is add a neutral density filter. When I added a neutral density 0.6, which is like saying ND 4X, for instance, 4 times the ISO, the image got nice and dark and looks kind of nicely balanced. Maybe still a little bit bright in terms of the detail under the bridge, but overall doesn't look too bad. And then I added, I think, another single layer of neutral density on top of that. So I had actually 3 stops of exposure reduction in front of the lens to get a decently balanced image. And what I'm going to do at some point here is I'm going to pull one of those neutral density filters, the single layer, I think, and add the polarizer on top. The polarizer helps reduce reflection off the water. It will make the sky appear darker blue. And it also represents 2 f-stops of exposure reduction. So I had a neutral density double layer and then a polarizer with 2 layers of reduction for a total of 4 exposure layers of reduction, which allowed me to shoot this image at a 5.6.5, which was right on the sweet spot of the lenses, exactly where I wanted to be. And it had the right amount of density in the sky, the right amount of detail in the clouds, and still the right amount of detail in the bridge. And that's what it looked like right there. Okay, so polarizers and neutral density filters added together can help you control the exposure of your images outdoors with a great amount of control and precision. Okay. Mostly it's, sometimes it's about getting those details in the clouds, right? It's really hard to shoot outside in Florida without a polarizer, at least, if not neutral density and polarizer, just to get details in the sky and just to have your sky look blue instead of blown out white. Okay. So that's the image after all that filtration stacked together. Now, here is the how to use a polarizer video, which is embedded in web courses. It's by B&H Photo, and it'll talk to you again about what polarizers do. But suffice it to say that a polarizer will act like a neutral density filter. It will increase the saturation of colors, and it will also do something really cool, which is it'll help minimize reflection. If you look at this split screen right here, looking into this pond, you can kind of see the surface of the water has a reflection of the sky in it, but when you add a polarizer, you can see through that reflection, through the surface of the water to the pebbles and stones at the bottom of the pond, okay? You affect the polarizer by turning it in the filter tray. So when you drop the polarizer in front of the lens, the polarizer will have an effect. As you turn the filter, you'll see the effect increase or decrease. So you put that tray in the matte box, and then you turn the inner filter stage like so, and that's kind of the same thing. It does the same thing to a square filter that the split ring did on the variable ND filter by turning it. Okay, you have to turn the polarizer to see the effect increase or decrease. Okay, and if you got, for instance, a car shot that you're doing, okay, and you got a reflection in the glass of the car. Let's say you're doing a driving shot and you've got the car mounted to the hood of the hero car, and you got two people inside talking to each other, and you wanted to get a two shot through the front windshield. Okay, you might have a big reflection on the glass, like in this shot of my car right here in the parking lot of the marina. I got a reflection of the sky, a little bit of a reflection of a palm tree up here. I got a big reflection of a palm tree on the hood of the car right here. Okay. But if you apply the polarizer and then turn it, okay, you can see the reflection in the windshield kind of go away. Check it out. So I got all that information there in the windshield. I want to see through to the people sitting inside the car. So I'm going to turn that polarizer. And when I do that, the reflection goes away and I can see right through to both headrests. See that? So that's what a polarizer will do for you if you're doing car shots. You see how the hood of the car, the palm tree's gone now for the most part. The reflection on the surface of the windshield is gone, and it reduced the reflection on the hood of the car as well to a really large degree. Okay, so that's how you can do a running shot looking through the windshield and not have all that reflection. All right. As far as increasing the density of color, this is the most common application of the polarizer, is to get your blue sky even bluer and denser under the polarizer. Okay. This is without the filter and this is with the filter. Okay. And then I already talked to you a little bit about that graduated filter. Here's an illustration of what's going on. Without the ND grad, you can see the sky is really bright. The foreground is bright, but not as bright as the sky. And there's a difference in exposure requirement between these two areas of the image. But with that neutral density grad filter, I can darken the sky and balance the sky with the brightness of the foreground and get more detail and dynamic range across the entire image by adding that gradual neutral density filter to the sky only. Okay, here's another illustration showing you what that can look like, maybe a better illustration. At the bottom, you've got the little, I guess this is the Snake River or the out in Wyoming, right? Kind of lazily winding through the landscape, and you got the nice green foreground, you got the trees, you got the mountains in the background, and then you got the sky. Well, on the left-hand side, the sky is all blown out because the exposure required to get a nice green foreground meant that the sky was going to get blown out. But with the grad on top, you can restore the value to the sky while keeping the value in the foreground where it needs to be. And this is the most common use for a grad filter. You can kind of do this in post, but I'd much rather just take the filter and take an extra 2 minutes, drop it in the matte box, line it up with the horizon, and fix my exposure in camera and not have to worry about spending, a lot of money in post-production to fix that using a colorist and a digital supervisor. In the DI, on the average TV show, if you have to do something like this in post-production, it can cost you upwards of $400 or $500 an hour to make an adjustment like this in post. And for 2 minutes on set, I can have this done at almost no additional charge and just bake it into the image and be done, not have to worry about it. Okay, so I did apply a little bit of a neutral density grad to the bridge situation I just showed you. It helped, but it was an N6 grad. And as I told you, to get that bridge exposure correct, I needed a full N6 and a polarizer with 2 more stops of exposure reduction. So the single ND6 grad just wasn't enough. but that's what it looks like. You can see how it's kind of thicker at the top and clear at the bottom. It's designed to basically darken up the sky and the clouds. That's what it does. What else have I got for you here? Here is a video I have embedded for you in web courses on how to use neutral density filters and grad filters. Okay. I talked to you about the UV filter. Basically, it's just a clear filter, mostly for protection, but it will reduce some atmospheric haze. And if you look at these two images fairly closely, you see how there's a haze layer along the mountain line in the middle of the image at the top 1/3. The white arrows are kind of pointing to it. If you apply the UV filter to this image and then you look at the mountain range, you can sort of see how that hazy blue strip is kind of gone now. And the image is fairly well balanced as a result. That's the atmospheric effect that this haze filter will have. But under normal circumstances, like shooting interiors, the haze filter won't do anything. It's just a clear glass filter. Some people buy these if they buy a really expensive lens and they want to protect that front element from damage, they'll put a UV filter on there as a protective layer between the expensive lens element in the front and the cheap filter they can replace if it, for instance, falls, if you drop it, for instance, on a shoot, right? I don't add these to my lenses anymore. I used to. Now I shoot without the filter unless I need to do the haze effect with it, and then I'll put it on. Simply because I just don't want anything between my image and my sensor that I didn't intend for. And the Tokina lens is very sharp and has a very nice color balance to it. And I don't want to mess that up by putting a filter on there that might bias or change that in any way. So I don't use them anymore. Okay. That's basically it for the presentation. Filters will have an effect on exposure. Next week, or the week after the midterm, rather, I'm going to talk to you about exposure. And we've got this little system we've worked out called the exposure triangle. And it's going to talk to you about how the sensitivity of your camera expressed as ISO, the shutter speed you choose to shoot at, which translates to, in this case for cinema, shutter angle or frames per second, and then the aperture you select in your lens to balance your exposure, they all interact and they all have an effect, one to the next to the next. And it's a balancing act between these three items here to create a properly exposed image in your cinema camera. Okay, and I'm going to talk to you about how to achieve that in 2 weeks. Okay. Filters will come into play in this discussion again, from the standpoint of exposure control. But today was just an initiation, a discussion about what filters can do for you, how they can affect your color, how they can affect your sharpness, or they can control reflections, they can control exposure, or they can correct color balance. Okay, lots of different things that filters will do for you. Okay, and they can be fun to experiment with as well. So they have a few filters that you guys can borrow from the film operations office. I would check them out, see what they got. It's mostly polarizers and neutral density. And then I would certainly check out the Koken selection because they're really inexpensive, fun to play with and experiment with, but they won't break the bank. Okay. And they're a precursor to a much nicer set of filters. So if you discover the filters that you like and use the most through the Koken system, and then you want to make your decisions a little bit more permanent, you can go out at that point and invest in cut glass maybe. And then you haven't over invested in cut glass to figure out what you like and what you don't like. Cut glass filters will rent. They're one of the things that cinematographers can fairly easily rent to production, so you can get your money back over time through equipment rentals with your clients if you purchase stuff like filters and lenses. So they end up being a nice investment as well if you choose cinematography as your career focus. Okay. Like I said, I have about 30 cut glass filters. I have another 50 or 60 Koken filters, and I have dozens of threaded filters that I've collected over the years. So they end up being, an investment that you make if you're a camera person by trade. But like I said, you can recoup your investment through rental. So it's not such a bad idea from a business standpoint to go ahead and invest in these as well. But do it once you know what you like and what you want. So that's it. That's filters. Anybody have any thoughts about this? Any questions or any sort of reflections after hearing my sales pitch? No? You're all filter experts now? Cool. Good. It's a good thing. Check out the videos. You'll get more information from those. I've kept you for, almost 2 hours at this point, and I want to let you go. The videos, all in all, might take you another hour of your time to watch those. If you watch my filter videos, those are really graduate level filter videos. Are going to give you all the detail, granular, as much information as you want. It'll take you another hour to get through those. Only do it if it's really, really something that you're interested in. You won't be responsible for any of that information, only what I've given to you here today. So have fun with it. If there's no questions, then we can go ahead and adjourn this meeting if you want. You sure nobody's got any last thoughts, parting thoughts about filters? Any questions about anything before I let you go? Okay, so at this point, you have your shooting assignment that you're somewhere in the process of completing. You'll have your midterm quiz next week, and I will host a review period on Monday. If you want to come, it's not mandatory. And then, we'll see you the week after that for exposure. Also, remember you got spring break coming up. So I'm going to get to exposure and depth of field, and I think one other topic, and then we may be backing up against your spring break time. So don't forget about that. All right. Well, then, if there's no questions, I will go ahead and adjourn you for the afternoon. I thank you very much for your time and attention. Have a good rest of your week, and I look forward to your assignments at the end of next week. Thanks so much. Have a good afternoon. Bye.